עץ חיים היא למחזית עמה ותומכיה מאושר תרחיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה
Shalom and Chag Sameach, Happy Passover. This is a great time of year, isn't it? We get together with our friends and our families, our communities, and we celebrate the liberation of our people from slavery in Egypt over 3,200 years ago. Passover is also known as Chag HaAviv, which means the festival of spring. And sure enough, there are all sorts of symbols on the Seder table reminding us that this indeed is spring. We have we always have a sprig of parsley, we call karpas, on the table. Some people put lettuce on the table, but you have to have some green vegetable that grows up from the ground. We also have an egg on the Seder plate. These things remind us of the rebirth of spring. Now, Passover is not really about, or mostly it's not about rebirth, it's about the birth of a people. It was during our liberation from Egypt that we found our national consciousness. We were born as a people. No longer were we merely a collection of families and clans and tribes. No, after coming out of Egypt, or as we were coming out of Egypt, we developed a national consciousness. We were born as a people. And yet, that theme of rebirth is also very much present in Passover. We tell the story over and over again, and this story has served as a beacon of hope and has given us a sense that no matter how bleak things might be, no matter how dark the circumstances are in which we find ourselves, that there is always a hope of redemption, and redemption will come. Naftali Hertz Imber, the person who wrote the poem that became the national anthem of Israel, Hatikva, wrote Od lo avda tikvatenu, that we had never lost our hope over those 2,000 years of exile. And this story has given hope not just to the Jewish people, but to many other national groups, many other ethnic groups throughout history who were fighting oppression and tyranny. I remember spending an evening with David Landau, the editor of Haaretz, Israel's largest daily newspaper. David Landau spoke to me, and I was with a group of rabbis in Jerusalem one evening a number of years ago, and he admitted to being a very secular Jew. He's not one who goes to the synagogue very often. He's not one who considers himself religious in any sense of the word. But he remembers fighting around the city of Bethlehem during the Six-Day War. And after the fighting was finished, he and a group of soldiers went to Rachel's tomb. Rachel is the only one of the matriarchs and patriarchs who is not buried in the city of Hebron. She is buried in a tomb just outside the city of Bethlehem. And it is said that when our ancient ancestors were being led out to exile in Babylonia that if you listen carefully, you could hear Rachel weeping. And to this day, you'll find many women go to the tomb of Rachel praying that they will overcome their inability to have children. But David Landau, this very secular Jew, says that he went to Rachel's tomb after the fighting had been completed, and there he was with his helmet and his rifle and all of his ammunition, and he said he burst out crying. He wept like a baby. Why? Somehow, even in the heart of this very secular Jew, there was this sense that redemption had come at last, and that God had not forgotten the Jewish people. On Chol HaMoed Pesach, that is the Sabbath, the intermediate Sabbath that falls during Passover, we read a very interesting Haftorah. Now, our Haftorah portion is taken from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37. It's called The Vision of the Valley of the Dry Bones. The hand of the Eternal was upon me, leading me out by God's Spirit and setting me down in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. God led me all around them. There were a great many of them spread on the surface of the valley, and they were very dry. God said to me, "Mortal, can these bones live?" I answered, "O God eternal, you alone know." Then God said to me, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, you dry bones, hear the word of the Eternal. Thus says the eternal God to these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. I will put sinews on you, and cover you with flesh, and spread skin over you. I will put breath into you, and you shall live. Then you shall know that I am the Eternal." I prophesied as I had been commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a loud noise, a sound. The bones came together, bone to matching bone. I looked and saw sinews and flesh and skin spread over them from above. There was no breath in them. Then God said to me, "Mortal, prophesy to the breath. O prophesy, and say to the breath, Thus says the eternal God, Come, breathe from the four quarters, and breathe into them these slain bodies, that they may live again." As I prophesied, as God had commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they came to life. They stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army. Then God said to me, "Mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, we are cut off from life. Therefore prophesy to them and say, Thus says the eternal God, I am going to open your graves, my people. I will lift you out of your graves and bring you home to the land of Israel. And when I have opened your graves and lifted you out of them, my people, you shall know that I am the Eternal. I will put my breath into you, and you shall live again. And I will place you in your own land. Then, says the Eternal One, you shall know that I, the Eternal, have spoken and acted." Every generation has its Pharaoh, its Nebuchadnezzar, its Ahmed Aminejad. But in every generation, we Jews have held on. We Jews have never lost our hope. We have been a light to the nations throughout the history, testifying to God's redemptive power. the Passover story continues to inspire not just the Jewish people, but all freedom-loving people throughout the world. Enjoy the rest of Passover, and Shabbat Shalom.
It's